The Adidas X18 Plus, the ultimate speed boot, if you don't know how to tie your shoes. What's going on, guys? Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com bringing you my review plus on-feet video of the brand new laceless Adidas X18 Plus in the Launch Energy Mode Pack colorway. We all knew that eventually a laceless boot would be available in the X lineup, and that boot is finally here. Although the way they've done the laceless system is entirely different to that of the Nemesis 17 Plus and the Predator 18 Plus. So we're going to talk about that in detail in this video because it's obviously a very important element of this shoe. We're also going to compare it to the X18.1, the variation of this shoe that does have laces that retails for $225 rather than $280, which is what these are going to run you. And I'm going to compare them to the X17 Plus Pure Speed that, of course, this model replaces. So if you want to learn more, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around, watch the entire video. And if you're interested in a pair of these for yourself, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen, or you can click the first link down below. That'll take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal $280 retail price. If you guys do end up enjoying the video, don't forget to support it with a like. And if you're new here watching for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. Extras include this box with built-in drawer. And you also get this mesh string bag with the Adidas and X logos on the front. Overall string bag score, 6.1. So starting off with the upper, it has been completely redesigned coming from the model. It replaces the X17 Plus Pure Speed. And the only reason why I bring that up is because obviously when a brand new generation of a boot comes out, you want to compare it to the old one. Is it better? Is it worse? What's improved? What's not so good? But really, there's nothing to compare here. This is straight up a completely different boot. If you're a fan of the Pure Speed, as I was, there's really nothing about the X18 Plus that's going to fit, feel, or really offer any kind of a similar experience in any way at all. They're two entirely different boots in almost every single way. Now, of course, what makes this particularly unique in comparison to the X17 Plus Pure Speed is the fact that it's laceless. And the laceless system, I will admit, does feel pretty good on feet. It's a very comfortable shoe pretty much straight out of the box, but at the same time, it does seem to suffer based on what I've experienced from all the same issues that I've had with all the other laceless boots from Adidas. And ultimately, this does come down to personal preference. I would say right off the bat, if you're somebody that likes your boots to feel very tight on your feet, very secure, no extra movement on the inside, you want the ultimate responsive sensation from a speed boot, this is probably not what you want. You'd be much better off with the X18.1, which I did a review on not too long ago. If you want to check that out, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen. But basically with this laceless system, all they've done here is they've reinforced a little bit of mesh. So you can see across the top of the foot, you have what looks to be kind of a rubber material. A lot of people, including myself, thought that these looked a lot like the Lotto Zero Gravity, the original laceless boot. But that is not the case. This is not a rubber. It's just a thin layer of synthetic material. It's got a little bit of debossed texturing right there, but it's literally just debossed. There is no extra reinforcement because when you look on the underside, you can actually just see the debossed areas. I gotta kind of push that in so you can see it. It's basically a very thin layer of mesh with this fused top layer reinforcing it. It does have stretch to it. They're not really difficult to put on or take off, but are they extremely secure? The simple answer to that question is not really, but it's also going to depend very much on how well these fit your feet. And you guys will see how they fit my feet specifically in this video. I'll talk about that in more detail later. But this is really one of those shoes, as are all the laceless boots from the Adidas brand, that you have to try on and really judge for yourself based on how they fit your feet specifically. Because if they don't fit you well, the issue with the laceless system is there is no adjustability. The way they fit and feel is the way they're gonna fit and feel for their entire lifespan. If they don't feel tight enough, you can't make them tighter. And if they feel too tight, they're not really gonna get looser. The other issue that I still have here, although it's not quite as significant with this system despite being so thin, is that this still will stretch under tension. So when you make a quick cut, a change of direction, that laceless system is going to expand a little bit, which means that your foot is not 100% secure inside of the shoe. As far as laceless systems go from Adidas, I think that this is probably the best one that they've put out so far, but is it still better than a shoe with a lacing system, which we have in the form of the X18.1? In my opinion, no. Which brings us to the rest of the upper that is pretty unique. It's what they're calling a skeletal weave. And I think a lot of people, just based on how it looks, kind of assume that this is a knitted upper, at least a variation of a knitted upper, kind of like the prime knit that we see on the Predator 18.1 and Predator 18 Plus, but that is not actually the case. This is what they're calling a skeletal weave synthetic material, and it is just that, a synthetic material, not a knitted upper. And the reason why I say that is when you look closely, you can really break down all the different layers. The skeletal weave part of the upper is going to be basically the yarns that aren't really woven, but more so laid out in what I would kind of consider to be a grid pattern against a top layer of synthetic plastic material, which happens to be translucent, so you can see the skeletal weave underneath. The weave itself is not tight. It's not really, it wouldn't be held in place unless it was fused against a synthetic material, which of course it is, which is why it has this look. You can see some of the lines are kind of wavy on the lateral side of the shoe moving into the forefoot, but then as you get to the medial side, they almost completely straighten out, and it just ends up being a grid pattern kind of positioned on a 45-degree angle consistently across the entire upper. Now, if you look here on the inside of the boot, where it's not covered up in any kind of synthetic material or a liner, you can actually see the base layer of this synthetic is a perforated synthetic layer. And you look closely, you can actually see it on the underside of this shoe. So you have that base layer, then you have a synthetic liner on the inside of the shoe. It's basically a synthetic suede, which runs pretty much across the entire inside, adding a nice padded sensation. Feels really good. Difficult to see because it is all neon yellow in color. And then you have the skeletal weave, and then on top of that, you have your polyurethane top layer. So it's a very heavily layered synthetic material that comes together quite nicely. It's soft, it's flexible, despite being so much different in comparison to the X18.1 and its speed mesh upper. Honestly, the two shoes feel very similar. If anything, this has a slight bit of extra thickness to it in comparison to the speed mesh on the X18.1, but for the most part, it's still gonna have that barefoot feel to it. There is, keep in mind, a little bit of extra padding inserted in the lining material in the forefoot and toe box area, so it's a barefoot sensation, but I wouldn't say that it's overly thin. It does compare thickness-wise to something like the X17 Plus Pure Speed, maybe a touch thinner, a little bit more pingy. But again, if we're comparing this to the Superflies or the Mercurial Vapors that are available right now with their Flyknit uppers, these don't feel quite as thin. The material as a whole though, it's very flexible, it's soft, it feels relatively sturdy, all things considered. You can see around the edges, there is an extra layer of fuse for the sake of durability and just adding more structural integrity. And then of course you have this extra seam that you'll also find on the X18.1 that I assume is there again for the sake of stability, as well as for the sake of the upper just having a more seamless kind of shape to it, not having any kind of big creases or bunch ups in that area of the foot, which is relatively common. You don't feel it though at all. It just kind of adds more of a visual element than anything. Overall, it's a nice upper, it's a cool way of doing things, but is it really that revolutionary in regards to how it fits and feels? In my opinion, no, but it does feel quite good, so I'm not complaining. So moving on to the rear of the shoe, you're gonna find what I consider to be a low-cut design. They're calling it a claw collar, which sounds very fancy, but honestly what they've done here is quite simple. You can see it's all fused around the edges with minimal padding, kind of what we've seen from New Balance several times in the past, although this does feel nicer than those boots that I'm mentioning. And then of course you have an extension piece here at the front and an extension piece at the back. The piece at the front, I personally don't mind. The piece at the back, I think is very contradictory versus what they've been doing with the X line, with the X16 and X17 generations with those S-curve heels. While I didn't like the look of the S-curve heel particularly all that much, at least it curved away from your heel and did legitimately relieve pressure. It was very comfortable. This is actually just gonna cause pressure because it's kind of going towards your Achilles heel rather than away from it. So if you're somebody that likes to wear lower cut socks where you'd have exposed skin across the back of your Achilles heel a little bit higher up, this is gonna rub and could potentially cause discomfort. So I would definitely recommend wearing socks that at least cover this area of your foot to avoid any kind of discomfort. But admittedly, this does soften up and really isn't an issue once you break the shoes in properly. It's got these extra kind of bumps debossed at the back. They're there more for the sake of looks. I'm not sure it's adding too much structure to the rear of the shoe. And then the inside heel liner, it's the same as what you're gonna find on the X18.1, where basically it's a synthetic suede material with no real padding at the very back or at the sides, but you have these two very large kind of ankle bumps, very soft padding, basically two pillows right there to lock your heel in place. I actually like this design, although I wish they would have added some padding to the very back of the heel, especially considering that these are laceless. So it's very important that these fit you exactly right, not just through the entire foot, not just the sizing and the width, but also your heel kind of has to match the back of this shoe really closely in order to not have any issues with heel slippage. And again, that's going to vary so much from person to person because of the lack of adjustability with a laceless system. So just keep that in mind. But I like the design as a whole, and you can see that it looks to have what kind of look like perforations. I thought they were in the pictures, but they're actually grip dots like we saw in the X17 Plus Pure Speed as well. They do a pretty good job of gripping your socks quite nicely to prevent any kind of extra slippage. The insole is of course fully removable and is pretty much the standard comfort insole we've been seeing from the brand on their top end models for years now. It has a synthetic suede lining on top, nice and soft, some perforations in the forefoot and heel, and it's made from a single layer of this white foam. Nothing too fancy, but it does get the job done. The Soleplate end stud pattern is the one element that you definitely can compare to previous generation X models in that it's more so a design tweak rather than a complete redesign. Now it looks pretty much like the same sprint frame construction, but they've renamed the sprint frame to speed frame. It still has the external heel counter, which I really like. I'm glad they carried that element over. And there's minor tweaks in terms of little kind of extra angles and cuts to the edge of the sole plate. They've even changed up the way that the stiffener bar works through the midfoot and heel area, but for the most part, it feels pretty much the same thickness of plastic, good flexibility to it. It's a really solid sole plate. We've been seeing variations of it since it was first introduced on the original F50 Adizero back in 2010. As far as the stud pattern is concerned, it is the FG stud pattern. It's listed only as FG on the box, so we don't really know for sure whether or not this is a true FG AG stud pattern, although honestly, you can get away with using it on both surfaces based on what I've experienced, but the overall layout remains identical to pretty much all the lines from Adidas right now. It has 4 studs in the heel, and then of course 7 studs in the forefoot, 3 on the outside, and then 1 support stud in the middle. The studs in the heel are kind of that teardrop shape that we did see on the previous generation X, and then the studs in the forefoot have more of a triangular bladed shape to them. You can see there's a little bit of a cutout to almost make them like a chevron style stud, kind of like what we see on the Mercurial line, but honestly these don't feel like the Mercurial stud pattern whatsoever. It works well. I wouldn't say that it's a significant improvement over what we had before. It feels slightly different, although it's really difficult to say whether or not it's actually truly better. Really, this feels like all the other stud patterns from the Adidas brand, mainly because they do have the same layout across the board. It works well, I have no issues with it, but if you've worn an Adidas boot in the last several years, you kind of know what to expect as far as traction is concerned. When it comes to weight, being that this is their flagship speed boot at the moment, you'd expect them to be quite light. It's also the most expensive one they have on offer at $280. Luckily, it is pretty light. In a size 9.5 US, these guys weigh in at 7.1 ounces, which is pretty much on par with what we had weight-wise from the X17 Plus Pure Speed, and also pretty much the same in regards to weight to the X18.1, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Are there lighter options out there? Absolutely, but I don't think weight is going to be a huge factor for you if you're really interested in the X18 Plus, because when it comes to speed boots that don't have any laces, this is technically the only one. So of course these are laceless. You're probably wondering, how do you put them on, or at least how difficult are they to put on? Well, I'm gonna do that for you right now. Basically what I like to do is grab these 2 extension pieces, which the extension pieces do make this easier to put on as well as take off. I will admit that, even though I do think they're a little bit unnecessary once the shoes are on your feet. But I like to kind of turn it sideways, get my foot in slightly, and then use my back thumb kind of as a shoehorn to support the back of the shoe, and then just kind of slide it in. And they're relatively easy to put on, as you can see. Once they're on, that's it. There's nothing to adjust. It really is just that simple. On feet, the X18 Plus feels really good. From a comfort standpoint, there really is nothing to complain about. For the most part, they feel pretty much just like the X18.1, even though it's not a speed mesh upper, it's what they're calling skeletal weave. It's soft, it's flexible, it does have that sock-like sensation, but then there's the way that they fit. And these actually fit me pretty well. I'd say out of all the laceless boots that Adidas has ever put out, these fit me the best, and that's something that's really gonna vary from person to person based on the shape of your feet specifically. If you fit really nicely in the laceless Predator 18 Plus and then you try these on, it's entirely possible that these simply won't fit you as well and you're just better suited in that Predator model. So something to keep in mind if you're planning on going the laceless route. But I think if you're talking about straight lockdown, overall performance characteristics in regards to responsiveness and stability, going with a boot, not just the X18.1 variant of this shoe, but any shoe with laces, that's going to be the better route when it comes to straight performance, stability, and lockdown over any laceless boot that has ever existed. And that's simply because you actually have something pushing your foot into the base of the sole, something that a laceless boot simply does not have. Yes, these are secure on my feet, enough so to where they're not going to fall off, but this top laceless element does stretch upon pretty much any kind of subtle movement. Even if I go like this, the top piece stretches and my heel lifts a little bit in the back. Now the heel lockdown is actually pretty decent, all things considered, because of the design they've gone for here, but is it as secure as the X18.1 with its lacing system? The simple answer to that question is no. So I don't want to come across as a laceless boot hater here. I know a lot of people think that I am, but laceless is really something that is kind of a niche market. It depends on what you want. Some people argue that 100% laceless boots are more comfortable. And if you're one of those people, hey, I can't really argue with you. Personal preference plays a huge role in what boots you should wear. And if this is what you really like, go for them. I think, honestly, this is probably the best laceless boot that Adidas has ever put out. But are they for me personally based on what I like? The simple answer to that question is no. As far as width is concerned, it's got the same general shape as the X18.1, where it's not overly wide, it's not overly narrow, it's got a snug fit in general. Kind of a similar shape to the X17 Plus Pure Speed, I'd say, but a little bit higher volume, but very comfortable nonetheless, and I think they will be suitable for most people, as long as you don't have super, super wide feet. And as far as sizing is concerned, they do run true to size. My feet are about a 9.25. I'm wearing these in a 9.5. And the fit and the length is pretty much perfect. So if you are looking to order a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size. Also, speaking of sizing, because these are laceless and you can't make them tighter, it's extremely important that you buy these to fit pretty much perfect, because if you buy them too big, they're going to be too loose and you can't make them tighter because they're laceless. So buying these with a lot of extra growing room, a very bad idea. So here are my final thoughts on the X18 Plus from Adidas, their laceless speed boot. Honestly, they're better than I was expecting them to be. I was a little bit concerned once I pulled them out of the box and saw how thin this laceless system was, but it does seem to hold your foot in place relatively effectively, at least to the point where this is going to be a high performing shoe. Does it perform as well? Does it fit as well? Is it as comfortable? Is it as responsive? Is it as locked in as what you're gonna find from the laced X18.1? The simple answer to that question is no. But if you're not super particular about how your boots fit, and if you get these and try them on and they fit you just right, you're gonna have a positive experience with them. Would they be my #1 choice from the Adidas brand? For me personally, no, but it really does depend on what you're looking for. I think if you're on the market for a pair of laceless boots, this is arguably the best laceless boot that Adidas has ever put out. So I can recommend them, but I will say that they certainly aren't for everyone. Anyways, guys, that is it for my review. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. Again, if you're interested in a pair of these for yourself, you can click the first link down below. That'll take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal $280 retail price. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching.